from musicians to businessmen to entrepreneurs to celebrities, they're all playing Monopoly in Miami.
Miami does like the build, which is a great thing, and I'm very optimistic about that. I think that we have more units under construction as a percentage of existing inventory than I think any city in the country.
The thing I love about Florida or South Florida or Miami is that I feel like my tax dollars actually get put to work.
Right now, the state of Florida has more AUM than Connecticut for the first time.
Really? Just got married and are gonna have kids soon and are now looking for their forever home, and we have $2 million. Mid Beach, Coconut Grove, Coral Gables, Morningside. I'm just curious what your thought is.
My name is Omar Morales. I'm a commercial real estate broker that's closed over $3 billion worth of deals in South Florida. This gives me access to some of the most prolific real estate deal makers in not only South Florida, but also the country. My goal with the Real Estate Deal Makers podcast is to keep the conversations timely and current so you have a better understanding of where the market is today, and more importantly, where the leaders of this industry think it might be tomorrow. So let's dive into today's conversation. My conversation today is with Anna Bozovic, the founder of Analytics.Miami, where she slices and dices Miami's condo and single-family home transaction data better than anyone else. Today, we talk about what's happening between different segments of Miami's condo and single-family home market, seeing different trends in the $1 million space when compared to the $5 million space or the $500,000 space. What pockets Anna finds particularly interesting after analyzing all this data, and our predictions of where this market is headed. We are clearly long Miami over the long term, but our sentiment for where the market may be in the near term may surprise you. Here's my conversation with Anna Bozovic.
Anna, pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
I like the fact that when people are looking at the Miami market, and we've talked about this a lot, people read headlines.
Yes.
But when you dive in, there's a much bigger story than what the headlines are.
100%.
And I think what you do a particularly good job at, as you put a lot of statistics out there about the Miami residential market and South Florida generally, you're able to bifurcate really what's happening in the market versus transaction volume down, prices down. But it's like, okay, but in what segment?
Right.
In what location? Because as we all know, real estate is a location-specific business.
Correct.
And what's happening in one submarket may not be happening in another.
Exactly right.
Right? So I'm curious, I guess from your standpoint, somewhere we can kick off is I feel like generally people just think rates are up, right? So transaction volume is down, and real estate has soured.
Right.
When you look at the statistics, what are you seeing in Miami between different segments?
What we're seeing in Miami is we're really seeing what I'm referring to as two different markets. We have this segment that's catering to the incoming wealth and talent migration, which tends to be new and more prime location. And then we have the other segments of the market, which are more affected by interest rates. And this is really why it's important to dig down in the segment, because we don't have one market. And this is all part of that wealth migration in the country, the shift in economic center of gravity from the Northeast to the southern states. And if we look at the market as a whole, that story gets lost. Because by definition, half the transactions happen below the median, right? And that's where the volume drops heavily.
By definition, half of the transactions happen below the median
price.
Oh, okay.
By definition, that's the median, right? The median price is
Has the median
half the
price
market.
shifted in Miami?
Well, it has. It's gone up tremendously since pre-COVID, close to 70% for both single family and condos.
That's wild. For both, okay.
Right. Up.
From 70%.
Almost, like high 60s. Yes.
Yeah. Do you see a bifurcation between like single family home and condos and what's happening in that market?
Yes. So basically what's happening across, just as a common point between the condo market and the single family home market, is that if we look at segments past the median price, or even past, let's just a crude marker like 500,000, our transaction volume is up versus pre-COVID. It's really the lower price points that have plummeted pre-COVID.
Got it.
And they've actually...
Volume being the dollar of transactions?
Number of sales.
Number of sales. So actual
transaction volume. Yes.
Right, okay.
So below 500,000 for the single family home market, sales are down like 80%. They're down tremendously. Right. But actually inventory is down even more. Right. So the market's actually tighter because people are locked in, they can't leave. Correct. They're going to get less house for their money and get a more expensive loan.
Correct.
So they have to have very good reason to move.
Yeah, I joke with friends, I'm like, I bought a 2-bedroom condo, which I just realized it's my forever home. Because I thought I was going to be there for 5 years, but now that condo, it's, yes, I've made a lot of money in the condo, But if I sell it, where am I going to go? Rates are 7, 8%, and everything's super expensive.
Exactly.
So it's lowered the inventory.
At the lower price points, inventory has plummeted. Like plummeted. It's basically disappeared. We're talking close to 90% disappearance of inventory below $500,000. It's crazy.
I work with a lot of home builders like Pulte, DR Horton, Lennar, and I chat with them a lot. And they're basically like, if I build like sub $500,000 townhomes, like I can't build enough of them.
No, you cannot.
Everybody
they're gone.
wants to
Supplies
buy that
gone.
if you can supply it for the market.
Correct.
Right?
Exactly right. Now, when we start looking at segments past those points, even like in my reports, I segment usually 500 to a million, 1 to 2.5, 2.5 to 5, 5 to 10. So for the single family home market, actually for the months of November and October, we're up year over year, and we're up versus pre-COVID in all these segments.
October and November of 2023
is higher than last year.
Higher sales than last year
in those segments, above 500,000.
Got it.
Condos, no. Condos started to drift a little bit down. Again, they're up versus
transaction volume.
Yes, they're up versus pre-COVID, but there's a slope down for transaction volume versus the last few years. Single family, no. And that actually ties into, I think, our long Miami. This is my long Miami compatriot.
Yeah, and we're always on Twitter.
Yeah, no, but it's true. It ties in because you could build more condos. And we're building. Miami is building, and that's a great thing. I'm in support of that. It's fantastic. Yeah. But when it comes to single family, within proximity of the urban core, let's say within 45 minutes of the urban core, you can't build more. It's a scarce resource.
Correct.
So through that purchase, you're locking in land value.
Yeah.
And I've been saying this for a while, and now I'm seeing it reflected in the transaction volume.
Yeah.
I was like,
because there's a big difference when you look at Miami. A big pitch that I have, and it's just like I believe in it so much. Is like there's not that much land.
Nope.
You've got the Everglades and you've got the ocean,
and
there's this little strip. Right. Exactly.
Yes.
So I'm like, one thing is buying a nice condo with a nice view. I get it. Another thing is owning 5,000 square feet of land in Coconut Grove.
Make sure that view is protected because something else will.
Correct. Unobstructed views definitely will merit a premium. But another thing is owning 5, 7, 8,000 square foot lot in Coconut Grove.
Correct.
In Morningside.
Or any of those islands, Palm, Hibiscus, any of those islands. I mean, you're buying a waterfront lot where you can see a panoramic view of the city of Miami. That's like buying in Central Park 80 years ago.
It's wild.
100%.
And I love who's buying there, right? You've got Ken Griffin.
Yep.
You've got the Google CEO, Eric Schmidt.
Yep.
You've got like all these guys that
Bezos
are basically.
Is up in there
Jeff
too.
Bezos is now an Indian crate.
Yeah.
You've got like basically, and you even have like David Guetta and like all these, from musicians to businessmen to entrepreneurs to celebrities. They're all playing Monopoly in Miami.
Yes, because they see it.
And my thing is like, think about the trickle down effect of that, right? So
100%.
You're noticing in the fact that like, you can't go and buy a $300,000-$400,000 home. You just can't.
Yep.
And I think a big elephant in the room is, and I'm sure you have an opinion on this, is there was a Wall Street Journal article that came out about the population in Miami actually having decreased.
Okay, so
over a period of time.
I wrote a letter to the editor because that wasn't true, actually, what they said in the report.
I love it.
And I was saying, well, haters are fans too. We're taking their taxpayers. That's what happened there. So there's IRS data showing that the median income, I believe it was the year of 2021, the median income of a Manhattanite moving to South Florida to Miami was 1.2 million, and for a New Yorker it was like 680,000, something like that, to that effect. So we're taking taxpayers, not just from them, but from everybody.
For sure.
Like right now, the state of Florida has more AUM than Connecticut for the first time.
Really?
Yes. There's $1 trillion of AUM that left the state of New York and the state of California recently. And we were the largest recipients of that money from New York.
The biggest, not to pause your train of thought, but the biggest stat during the pandemic that I saw was Florida and Texas sort of are the biggest beneficiaries of population migration.
Net recipients.
A lot of net recipients, right? But if you look at taxpayer money,
we're getting them.
Adjusted gross income, right?
Yes.
Because like if electrician, plumber, waiter, waitress moves to Houston and Jeff Bezos moves to Miami, they're both one person, but the economic impact of those people are very different.
Very different.
And what I noticed is the craziest stat I remember seeing, and I couldn't believe it, was the net adjusted gross income of people moving to Miami was up $21 billion, first place. Second place was Texas.
Yes.
At $3 to $4 billion.
Yes.
So you just see the disparity in who is moving where.
Correct. We also have the highest number of high-value millennials moving. Millennials earning over $200,000 a year. That's another stat. Yes, we're getting people who are making money. It's a great thing. Listen, the flow of ingenuity, the desire to create, it always goes somewhere.
Yeah.
And it's going to flow to the place of least resistance.
Correct.
And we're that place for
I
many,
like
many
this
reasons.
thesis. I like this thesis when you look at the country, right? And I believe in it because I see it in my day-to-day life. Sorry, smack the mic. This thesis that 50 years ago, it was like, where do I need to live to be a banker? Where do I need to live to be a tech entrepreneur? And it was like, you need to go to New York. And there, whether you don't like New York, whether you don't like the subways, whether you don't like the prices,
tough luck. You
need to be there. That's
now it's where do I want to live? That's the huge shift. This is what they talk about a lot. It's the shift away. Okay, so this is part of my whole thesis here is that many of the ways that we've been living thus far, our habits, the way we conduct business in our lives, were 20th century.
Repeat that.
Oh, I speak quickly.
Yeah,
Apologies.
no, you're good, because
So
I missed it.
many of the ways, most of them, and the ways in which we live, our habits, the way we conduct business, life, how we go to work, all of these things were 20th century constructs. They were pre-internet, post-World War II, 20th century constructs.
You go to work,
that's where all these habits were made.
it is.
And all these city centers you mentioned where you had to be, these are 20th century constructs. New York was the capital of the 20th century world. And all those habits were created then. The internet came at the end of the 20th century, but it wasn't always this amazing fast thing. It was like, right?
Yeah.
And so it was incorporated piecemeal into existing habits. We never like cleared it off and had a clear slate and redesigned life around new technology. People are creatures of habit. It's sticky. It came in, piecemeal. COVID broke habits long enough to allow the adoption of new ones. And that's what's happening now. Like we never reinvented life around the internet like we are doing now.
Yeah. That is so interesting.
And change is inevitable. That's also like whenever I look at things and how they move, like we've talked about this, data points in isolation are not that interesting. Like what's driving it, right? And you want to get super fundamental and kind of like build your case from there, like a proof, like a math proof, right? So change is inevitable.
Yeah.
That's
change
it.
is the only constant.
And people have trouble with this.
Yeah.
They really do. They think, oh, but it is. I'm like, but it wasn't always.
Correct.
And London was the capital of the world before New York.
Yeah.
And it's not a negative thing. I grew up in New York. I love it. But the change is inevitable. Nothing is forever.
And think about how much, because you mentioned this, COVID accelerated all these trends and habits.
It broke habits.
When I go to the gym, for example, perfect example, I used to wake up 5, 6 in the morning, hit the gym first thing because I had to be at the office and then go work all day.
Right.
Now I realize that I actually prefer waking up at 5, 6 in the morning, jumping into my work while like the world is quiet down. Then like before lunch at 11 a.m., I get a quick 30 minutes to an hour in for the gym.
Right.
But that completely changes my daily routine and makes me more productive.
Yeah.
Other people may be less productive.
It works for you. That's how it works.
But the habits completely shifted. And for me, I started getting into my own in my 20s when this all happened.
Right.
COVID hit when I was 28, 29, call it. And I can't imagine somebody that's ingrained these habits over a 40-year career in New York to now have to be like, wait, I can work from my kitchen potentially,
Right. Which is also why I think it's cool that we're getting the high-value millennials. I think that's all part of that shift in the world. It's like the vanguard. Everyone who's moving here now is kind of like the vanguard.
Yeah.
And that it's great that we're getting these figureheads like Bezos and all these guys coming here. But the Brookings Institute article you mentioned, right? So it was an article.
The population decrease.
It said Miami losing population. It was kind of this ominous, nasty headline.
I have never been sent an article more than that article.
And
since I'm so long Miami, people are like,
I wrote a letter to the editor. They wrote back this carefully crafted letter to me saying like technically they didn't misrepresent because they quoted the source. So I read this article and they cited the source. Their entire article is based upon the findings of a Brookings Institute report.
I remember.
Yes, you go to the Brookings Institute, you can download their raw data, even it's like a fully free, transparent thing, like here's your data, right? Yeah. So the Brookings Institute studied population migrate patterns in, I forgot how many it was, like municipalities across the country with 500,000 or more people. It was like 34 or 38 in the study, whatever it was, right? And they tracked the movements. Now, many dense cities had been losing population steadily. Actually, it's a separate point for like the last 10 years before COVID. But during COVID, something like almost all, except for 4 of this whole list, lost population in peak COVID year, right? New York was one of them. Miami was one of them. Chicago, LA was one of them. It was all but like 4. So everybody did. That was not unique, right? So the article, the headline made it seem like what happened in Miami was particularly bad and unique, right? Yeah. None of that was true. So Miami was part of the whole group that lost population. Now, it's, of course, people left cities during COVID. But what happened immediately post? That's the interesting thing. Miami went back, according to the report they cited, Miami went back to population positive the next year. Yeah. New York did not on a county or city level, and neither did Los Angeles.
Got it.
So really,
it was a moment in time where people left cities, COVID hit, and they captured that moment and said,
but only for Miami.
Decrease. Yeah.
When it was all of but 4 of them
this is just an urban to suburban migration.
It happened across
COVID
the whole country. And then we actually went back to positive growth the following year. LA and New York did not. And so really the article should have been like, what's wrong with New York?
Correct.
And I wrote that to the editor. I wrote a whole letter, and they like took a few days. They wrote me back 3 or 4 paragraphs saying they did not misrepresent because they cited the source.
So they just love the idea of like, we found a data point that bucks the trend of the narrative that's being told with like shifting migration patterns.
Misrepresented it. Sorry guys, they did.
And you're just like, hey, you plucked a very specific point and it's not a representation of what's actually happening.
Well,
and I tell people, when people call me, and I should do a better job of this and have like statistics like Anna does. But when people call me, I'm just like, listen, I see it, I feel it, I've been living it.
Yeah.
My building in Brickell, right, we're a block away from it. My building in Brickell went from 95%, and I'm making these numbers up, but like 95% Latin American people in my building. I'm that annoying guy that when the elevator opens, I'm like, hi, how are you? How's your day? Like, where are you from? Always. It's just fun. I'm like, people, you know, like we're all interacting. Everyone was Latin American. Everyone was Hispanic. 5 years ago, literally from 2019 to 2021, or like 2020 to 2022, it is now 98% domestic migration.
Yeah.
Everyone in my building is like a Morgan, a Jordan, a Bill, a Jill and Jane.
Yep.
They're from Connecticut. They're from New York. They're from Chicago. They're from Boston. They're from LA. They're from San Fran. And I'm just there in my building like, I'm the only remaining Hispanic in my building. But when I'm laughing at, I'm like, what do? They're computer science majors.
Yes.
They're financiers. They're bankers, and they're making $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 on salary.
Yep.
You've been in Miami for a while. That didn't exist in 2018.
No, there was no tech scene in 2018.
Nobody made over $100,000 on salary. Nobody.
No.
You had to be a salesman or woman, an entrepreneur.
Of some sort, creating something.
You're doing something.
Yes.
But if you were salaried in Miami, you're making 60 grand.
Didn't exist.
Crazy.
Correct.
And now you make $300,000. I'm like, welcome. How are you?
It's fantastic.
You know? It is wild. So when I see the migration happening, it's just like, I guess a big question is, it's clearly gotten very expensive. I've got friends that thought they were gonna, we're all in our early 30s at this point, sort of my social circle. And they thought they were gonna own a home in Coconut Grove. And now they're renting again another 2 or 3 bedroom in Paraíso or whatever it is in Edgewater.
Right.
So do you see pricing continuing to go up? Do you see it flatline over the next handful of years? I'm just curious what because we're long Miami, but.
Yes. So I see the general pricing. I feel like in general, the residential markets are finding their footing around this new reality, which is different than the pre-COVID reality. I think that the extreme spikes are done.
For sure.
That was post-cataclysmic event. It did that. And now it's kind of finding its footing.
Real estate doesn't 2x in a year.
No, not again the next year. So it's leveling off. It's leveling off.
Yeah.
And Miami does like to build, which is a great thing. And I'm very optimistic about that. I think that we have more units under construction as a percentage of existing inventory than I think any city in the country.
I do this for a living, and you said that better than I.
Okay.
That's exactly right. Honestly.
That's wonderful.
It's amazing.
Because then we can receive all these people who are coming here to live and create. I think that's a great thing.
With a better value proposition at lower rents.
New York's building nothing.
Yeah. It's crazy.
As a counterpoint. Nothing. So that's symbolic in and of itself.
Well, Florida, right? They passed that legislature, the Live Local Act.
Yes.
Just the name, Live Local Act. We want you to live locally.
Great. It's a great
Why?
thing.
So that acre of land that used to be for a 25-unit building, tiny, now we're going to allow you to build 400 units in a skyscraper. And for me, I'm like, guys, this is a good thing.
It's a super good thing. It's fantastic. So I think that we're seeing also in the segmentation of the data, the condo market is trending a little bit differently than the single family home market.
Pricing and volume? Both?
Just volume. Okay. Just volume. And I think that it's not a bad thing. Things can't go up forever, and we need housing for everybody. But again, to the point, the single family home prime market is just such a scarce resource. So I see that kind of behaving a little bit separately because you can't build more of it.
Yeah.
And then the interesting thing we're seeing in our market is we're really going back to the point of segmentation is that we have this segment that's being built for and attracting the wealth and talent migration. And it tends to be new and expensive and built to higher standards.
Yeah.
So one way I like to segment the market also is on a price per square foot basis, because something can just be big and expensive, but not necessarily prime. Right. So when you break down price per square foot, you're really filtering for new and prime location because older stuff wasn't built to those standards.
Correct.
So I look at between 1,000 and 2,000 square foot now, and then 2,000 plus a square foot. And that's where you see the multiplier. It's shocking. So I think it was Q3 of this year, condos past 2,000 a square foot in Miami-Dade County were up 475% versus Q3 of 2019.
So pre-COVID condos that sold for north of $2,000 a square foot,
Right.
which is expensive.
Right. There were just like 6 of them sold, 5. Now it's like
Right.
over 30.
And
per
now
quarter.
2023, it's a
Yeah.
467%
Something like that,
increase.
close to 500%.
And it's basically because now there's people that are coming in that can afford
Yes.
$2,000 plus,
Yes.
and that's the pricing of the condo.
Correct. And I think that the new stuff, back to the condo market, I'm hopeful we're going to get inventory for everybody. And I think we'll continue to get this pushing the envelope of this higher price stuff as the wealth and talent migration continues.
Correct.
But those to me, and that's almost 90% all cash. It's 88% or so all cash.
The people
Past
that bought
2,000 square foot. So the
which
higher
are
up you go
interest
in
rate
price.
insensitive.
Yes, correct. Maybe they refi later. I don't know, but that's not clearly not a problem, right?
Got it.
So the higher up we go in price, the more all cash we are across the board.
Very interesting.
So it also this ties into like America's polarization as a broader thesis of
Yeah.
wealth fragmentation across the country.
Yeah, which I find interesting because when I, having worked with some clients that are building the most luxury, expensive buildings in Miami, they're selling things at $4,000 or $5,000 a square foot.
Yep.
So for me, it's like, guys, when you have a billionaire or a centimillionaire buying a 3,000 square foot apartment for $15 million, $20 million,
They just
I'm
like it.
it's crazy.
They
Like
don't
they're
care.
just like, oh yeah, interest rate's gonna be 8 or 4. I'm buying it because I want it.
And they want to be there.
But the trickle down effect of that.
Yes.
And then
Yes.
for me, I also think about, okay, there's still a lot of people in the Northeast and the West Coast that want to be in Miami, but whether because of jobs or because of how expensive it's gotten over the last 3 years, they haven't been able to get there. But during COVID, they were here,
Yep.
whether for a month or
Yep.
6 months, and they're like, I want to come back. Like, I want to
Yes.
be there. And for me, once all this wave of supply starts hitting Miami in 2024, 2025, I think it's going to give a leveling of rents. It's
Which
going
is
to
great.
give people, I think it's phenomenal.
Yeah, I agree.
And I even tell my clients, this
Yeah.
is good because more people will come in
Yes.
here and that means more family formation.
Yes.
Here's an
Yes.
interesting trend that I thought about. Who are the people? Because I feel like we're missing a segment in Miami, right? And what's that segment? We've got very, very wealthy bankers and entrepreneurs that are sort of like downsizing baby boomers, right? People that are like, hey, I'm selling my house in Connecticut, I'm buying a condo in Miami, and I'm living my best life, with my wife or whatever it is. And so we've got that older segment that's wealthy here.
Right.
The younger generation, like the early 20s and stuff like that, I feel a lot of them, we just hired one at Berkadia where it was like, he graduated from Pittsburgh and is like, I'm going to be making XYZ money in Miami. I want to be in Miami. And even though it's expensive, like I'm going to rent a studio across the street from the office and I'm going to live at the office and work. And I want to be here.
Yeah.
So I feel like we have those younger professionals because they see
They feel it.
excitement,
They feel the energy, the growth.
I feel like everyone that I've met that was in Silicon Valley from like 2010 to 2020, aside from the fact that they're multimillionaires now, they're all like, man, you could feel the energy in Silicon Valley. And now they're here and they're like, I can feel the energy in Miami.
Thing.
And I'm like, I love that. But the segment that I think we're missing, and this is, again, just my thought, is the young families and the forming families. Because they're like, I can't afford it. If you're local, I can't afford it, so I'm going to move out somewhere where I could afford it.
Right.
And if you can afford it, you're also like, I don't love like the school system in Miami, right? I can get a much better school system in Atlanta or Connecticut or New York. Right? But what I think is interesting is when 17,000 apartment units come online over the next year or two, and then I, for example, let's say I was 22 or 26, or let's use the colleague that just signed the first year job at Berkadia. If he finds a girlfriend that turns into a wife that ends up having kids in Miami, their roots are going to be here.
Stay. I think that cycle's just started. Think about what you just said.
So I think that missing middle sort of grows organically.
I agree.
From people that are
people
here.
Stay, they'll be comfortable. Meanwhile, the city will fill in.
Correct.
I think the timing is going to work out.
And a funny point about schools, I know a gentleman that builds schools for school operators. And he said, Omar, I've never had interest from school operators being in Miami because the land was very expensive and the tuition was very low. Right? Now, yes, the land is still expensive, but the tuition that my school operators across the country think they can charge in Miami has skyrocketed 5x.
All those people buying those 2,000 square foot condos.
They got to put their kids somewhere, and money is like less of an issue. They're like, I just want quality.
Correct.
So now the school builder is like, Omar, again, I would have never sold land to a school builder. I sell land to multifamily developers. I sell a lot of land, and now this guy's like show me land in Coconut Grove, in Coral Gables, in like
That's great.
Morningside. And I'm like, that's amazing.
It's fantastic.
What happens when you get 5, 10 great brand name schools
It's going to fill in.
coming
People
in Miami?
stay with their kids. It's going to fill in.
And so for me, it's like everything that we're seeing is just planting seeds.
It's early days. I keep saying this too. I think we're both keep saying this. It's early days because these things build.
Yeah.
And also the forces that are pushing people to us are also in their early days.
Yeah.
We have positive momentum. They have negative because they're
Correct.
losing taxpayers. And all these high tax jurisdictions, in New York City or LA, 1% of the taxpayers account for over 40% or 45% of tax revenue.
It's wild.
And you lose just 10% of them, you've accelerated
That's wild.
your decimation of your revenue. There.
There's this concept of vicious and virtuous cycles, right? I think there's a very vicious cycle happening in states where they're losing taxpayer money. Also, they weren't good allocators of tax money.
No, they never are.
Right?
Are they ever? Come on.
But I'll give you an example. I was in a meeting with Ken Griffin and Mayor Francis Suarez. And Mayor Francis Suarez made the joke to Ken Griffin in the meeting, and he was like, you know, like clearly you moved here because of taxes, or like what other reason besides taxes, right? And Ken Griffin stopped him and was like, you know what? It wasn't even a tax issue. And you could comment that he's so rich that like taxes is a foregone conclusion. But what he said was interesting. He said, the thing I love about Florida or South Florida or Miami is that I feel like my tax dollars will actually get put to work. Right? I don't see the crime. I don't see the homelessness. I see the infrastructure. I mean, the expressways here are never not building wider. So he's like, if you were to increase taxes, I actually wouldn't be opposed to it. Because
it's getting quality of life.
It's getting quality. I see the investment. And when he said, if you could increase taxes, I wouldn't be opposed to it. Mayor Francis looks at the people on the meeting. He's like, I'm not increasing taxes. I'm not increasing taxes. But I thought it was interesting.
He said, I watched actually, it was an interview at Miami-Dade College where Suarez interviewed him. I went to that. It was a year and change ago. He said something similar. He also said wokeness at schools at that segment, but that's a separate point.
Wokeness?
Wokeness at schools.
Yeah.
He said that too at that interview.
The whole like political thing.
Yeah.
That's a whole
other thing. But he said that. He said that and quality of life. Those were his two things.
I recall. I have so one of my mentors in life, right? When I graduated college, I was very fortunate to go work at a hedge fund. And the money manager is a centimillionaire/billionaire, like a Warren Buffett-esque type of person. And he's like, Omar, my son, I'm not going to name the Ivy League school, but he's like, my son went to this school and he's a socialist now. Like,
I've heard this from people.
And I'm like, wait,
you're like, what?
The best money manager I've ever met and grew up with and got mentored by, his kids are socialists.
It's insidious.
And he literally said, like, he went to the school, a capitalist, he left a socialist. And I kind of just like laughed at it. But now with recent politics, I'm like, man, that is
I have a friend in a situation. The school turned his daughter into a socialist, and he stopped giving donations every year. And they flew in to ask him why, and he told them that's why.
It's wild. So we'll shift topics from it, but I think what's interesting is you're getting a very bright, capable mind to a university. And if you've ever walked in Harvard, Columbia, MIT, you're like, wow, right?
I went to Columbia.
And then, you did? Yeah. Amazing. So you go to these
I'm not a fan of schools, though, having said that.
Yeah, and I think that's changing a lot, too. But, which is actually, that's how we'll dovetail back to Miami. But my thought is you're getting people that are inspired by the location in which they're at these campuses. Right. So they're much more apt and influenced to believe.
It primes you because you're impressed.
Because you're like, wow, this must be right.
Correct.
But to shift gears from that, I think you said something interesting. That you said you're not a fan of school, but I do think the formal education process has yet to be disrupted in a meaningful way. I feel like we see we see it happening, right?
People are homeschooling to a higher percentage. That was one of the shifts also during COVID, which is great, I think.
People say, oh, Miami doesn't have a Harvard. Miami doesn't have an MIT. And more, right, you're like, shrug. More and more, I'm like, that's not going to be the driving force. Because if you are a willing and capable learner, you're going to go online.
Democratization of information, everybody.
You've got the whole world.
It's great.
Yeah. Exactly. So for me, I'm like, guys, we don't need a Harvard. No. We don't need an MIT. You know what we need? We need energetic, ambitious, happy, healthy people to move down here. 100%. And a lot of those people are moving down here.
100%.
Which is something that reminds me that I want to touch base with you on, because you're fit, you're athletic, all these things. I have such a hard time with telling people that Miami is not Las Vegas, in the sense that, like, they think that I am like this party boy, playboy,
I
like
get these questions
yacht,
too.
11
Like,
clubs. And I'm like, I can't tell you the last
I've
time.
been to a nightclub twice in the 10 years I've been in Miami. One was like a party. I had to go. It was like a party, birthday party with something else.
Yeah,
Like, it's not my thing at all.
Correct. And it could be that you come here and you're like, oh, that looks cool, exciting, and fun. You do it.
Cool, you're on vacation, have fun. Yeah,
Right.
it's fine.
But when you live here, I mean, your life is grabbing sun, working out, running
I train
around.
and work and like I don't do any of that stuff. And this is one of the best places to be healthy in because it's always sunny and it's always great.
Correct.
Whether it's like mental health or physical health. You feel down, you walk out, you see the palm trees, you feel better.
Yeah.
Everyone's fit all year round. It's bikini season all year round. Like
you can't hide.
You can't hide.
You can't hide your body with layers of clothing.
Today's 70 and we're all chilly wearing like sleeves.
Correct.
But this is
I had people tell me, they're like, dude, you come to Miami and everyone's like fit and hot and attractive. And what does it do to them?
It makes you want to be more.
You're like, I need to be healthier. I need to like go to the gym.
That. I think that's
the
a great
amount
thing.
of people from the Northeast that like just their body was an afterthought. Money and power was the main primary driver. They come to Miami and within a year, they've lost 20 pounds. They've got pecs. Or they're squatting, and I'm just like
they're like Bezos now versus Bezos when he started.
Now Bezos is like the Terminator almost.
Exactly.
He's living his best life.
And he's in Miami. Look at that. He chose Miami. But you know that tax that they had. This is talking about like negative cycles. So the state of Seattle, right? They had proposed that unrealized capital gains tax that targeted basically 5 people.
Crazy.
Right. And his departure took away 40% or 45% of their projected revenue.
Stop, really?
Yes.
That's crazy.
Isn't that crazy? And the same thing how California's mansion tax failed abysmally. It brings in 1/10 or so.
I talk about talk to me about the people that you want to attract to your city. And talk to me about the people that you're driving away.
Right.
And I love the fact that Miami and South Florida, and really Florida generally, is like accepting people with arms wide open.
Yes.
Pro-business, pro-work, like lower taxes, great weather, and then you talk about these other cities. Who are they driving away? The best people that you want in your cities.
Yes.
And I'm just like, how is this?
Well, and there's a whole theory. People ask me, why? Okay, look, the mayor of Chicago, when he came in, Chicago was also experiencing exodus of population. What does he do? He puts forth proposals for new wealth taxes. And so we're like, wow, are they stupid? No, they're not stupid.
Yeah, so let's drive them out even further.
Well, they just care about getting reelected.
Right.
And if their actions make no sense, within that context, you have to put them within that context, because their prosperity is not aligned with that of their jurisdictions. If they just want to get reelected, what will they say?
Right,
and
it's a different incentive.
And it's those things. And they're going to keep pandering to the growing percentage that is not paying in.
Yeah.
And that's how you get the Venezuela effect.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Well, in Argentina, you just saw that this Malay guy got elected, and he's like a capitalist. Like, we're cutting off the central bank. We're adopting the dollar. We're adopting the U.S. dollar. I'm like, I think it's great. It's not going to be easy, but I think it's great long term.
Absolutely.
I got the best analogy from an Argentinian friend. He's like, basically the building was on fire, and we just all decided to jump and basically see if we make it out on the other side. But the building was definitely on fire.
We were done. Yeah. We had to go. Yeah.
Would you be a good person to ask, and you can say no, but like your opinions and your thoughts on specific submarkets? Because a question I get a lot, and you and I are both on Twitter and social media, and maybe you get similar questions, is like, hey, what's the difference between Edgewater and Midtown and Brickell and South Beach and Mid Beach and Coconut Grove? Yeah. And I'm curious just generally how you see those markets and what your opinions are of them. I
mean, they're behaving, if we look at segmentation of sales volume, all those things, they're behaving fairly similarly. Once you segment by price and age of product, all those areas you mentioned are considered urban cores. So they behave very similarly. It's a question of what's available in each one.
In those
pockets. So South Beach, for example, has very little new inventory because it's difficult to build in Miami Beach. There's just 5 park going up, basically. Right?
That is inventory.
That's inventory. They sold the top half. They have some left in the bottom half. Whatever. It's difficult to build in South Beach.
Right.
But beyond that, it's just a question of product availability.
Got it. So most of the people, because you work with a lot of like residential, like people looking for residential real estate. So do you see them agnostic as to, hey, Coral Gables and Coconut Grove, and they're just like, hey, where I get the best bang for your
Okay, those are house markets, right? Not condo markets. So I guess, yes, mostly, right? So in those cases, really the limiting factor has been availability of houses.
Right.
And if somebody's looking at Coral Grove and Coconut, it's within similar proximity.
Right.
I have found that it's where they can get the best house.
Right.
Because it's not like those areas are pretty close.
Correct.
And the single family home market is so tight
Yeah.
that you just can't be that picky.
So what question, just if you have, let's say $2 million, right? Random number. But like you have $2 million and you're like, I want to buy a house and I'm going to live there, for the next 10 years, where with understanding what 2 million gets you in Coconut Grove versus Morningside versus Mid Beach.
Do they have kids? How much space do they need? Who is this person?
Let's make up a person.
Okay.
This person is just got married and are going to have kids soon and are now looking for their like forever home, in the sense of like, this is where our kids are going to grow up. And we have $2 million to spend. Are you thinking, Mid Beach, Coconut Grove, Coral Gables, Morningside? Like, I'm just curious what your thought is.
I mean, Coconut Grove is going to be tough because they'll get something very small.
Yeah.
Coral Gables, similar. There's very little below. Actually, there's very little below 2 million. Any of those markets. I've tried that too. It's basically disappeared.
Yeah.
It's like the 2 million became the new 1 million in all of those markets.
Yeah.
So to get anything that's livable and
what do you think you get bang for your buck and neighborhood specifically?
I mean, Morningside still has some things.
Morningside I like.
Yeah. I was just talking the other day. Morningside's not bad.
Yeah.
Even going up to what's it called? What's up further up in Morningside?
Like Miami Shores?
Miami Shores, yes. Miami Shores.
I see that happening a lot.
Yeah, and it's filling in. And it's still very close. It's a 20-minute drive with no traffic down.
Correct.
So
Brickell, the airport.
Yes.
And I also noticed the beach is also growing a lot more south of Fifth.
Yep.
Right?
Yes.
So if you look at the One Hotel, if you look at Faena, if you look at Soho, it's around like 40th Street, which is relative to where Miami Shores is, give or take.
Exactly right. As far as Miami Beach proper, Mid Beach at 2 million, you're still tough.
It's so tough.
It's going to be something really small and crappy.
Yeah, it's crazy just having grown up in Miami and just.
That's right, you did. Yeah, so you've seen it all.
I remember like you would think $800,000, from $600,000 to $800,000. You would have a very livable home.
It's a teardown now. There's literally nothing.
It's a teardown.
There's literally nothing.
It's a teardown.
That's that segment that's disappeared.
Yeah, it's wild. And now like my friends are like, wow, we're doing pretty well for ourselves. I'm like, yeah, your income's up 2x, but the property values are up 4x over that
inventory
5-year
dropped.
period.
That's the other part of our residential markets is that, and the story gets lost when overall transaction volume is reported on, is that even for segments in the condo market that may be transacting at lower volume than last year, if we look at now versus pre-COVID, supply and demand, so transaction volume versus active listings, all segments are tighter than pre-COVID.
Wow.
All of them.
Volume,
pricing, look at the relationship
sales.
between supply and demand.
Yeah.
So if like we've had volume drop versus last year, available listings, the supply-demand ratio is still tighter than it was pre-COVID.
Right. Well, that's my thing.
Board.
So I work obviously with a lot of commercial real estate, multifamily properties, land. And what I tell people is very, very, very different is my clients buy something to probably sell it for a profit in 3, 5, 7 years.
Right.
And they buy it with loans that are 3-year loans, 5-year loans, 7-year loans, 10-year loans, right? A lot of the volume that we saw in COVID, a lot of them were purchased with 3-year bridge loans. Mm-hmm. So they're going to turn over quickly.
Right.
You look at 2024, which is if you take 2021, you add 3 years to it, 2024, there's a lot of loan maturities. And that means a decision has to be made. You have to refinance, you have to sell, you have to recap. Like there's options, but like you got to make a decision. You have what's called a capital event. Let's use me for an example. I bought a condo in late 2020, early 2021, like perfect timing. I've got 27 years left on my residential mortgage. Where do you think I'm gonna, I'm not gonna go anywhere. I'm just gonna sit here. And even more so if I have a house, right? Because you can talk about condos being transitionary for a lot of people.
Right.
But if I was 36 years old and I would have bought a house in Coconut Grove for my kids to be close to school.
Hey, you're good. You're not going anywhere.
I am not going anywhere. Like that inventory, and like I think you mentioned this. You had a client that was looking for a house or a condo, and you were offering the guy double 2x.
And they said no.
Yeah, I'm good.
This is like from 10 to 20 million, everybody. They were turning down
2x.
Yeah.
So
too inconvenient to move. I don't want to pack. What else? Where else would I be?
It's crazy. Yeah. I want to end with like 2 comments, right? One is, and obviously anything you want to include is, one is when you see these billionaires moving here, what makes me so fired up is that these people can literally live
anywhere they want
in the whole world,
and they're choosing Miami. It's not about money. So again, taxes. Okay, like Bezos left. He probably. I think that the taxes they're proposing were like the straw that broke the camel's back, right?
Correct.
He's just like, I'm out. Like,
Correct.
first quality of life, it's not going to matter, but he's just done, right?
Correct.
And he's done, and where does he go? He comes here.
Right.
And you know, for all of us in this life, all we own is our time. It's how we spend our time. You can't get more of it. That's our only resource, really.
Right.
And that's true for everybody. But especially when you have no limitation of resources, I think that's very clear to him. That's how he's making decisions. We all should be, really, but you know,
Correct.
there's life. He doesn't have those constraints.
Yeah.
And so, given absence of constraints of resources and valuing how he spends his time, he chooses Miami.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So for me, I could talk to you all day because we're like two peas in a pod
I know.
of like how we think about the world, and
We see it. It's early days.
seeing
And
and
it's
breathing
early
it.
days. That's what I keep saying, because it's those loops. While we're building positive momentum, and that's a great point you made. That's a great insight. I think that we're going to fill in that missing middle as those people stay.
Organically.
It's going to organically fill in. And then meanwhile, our feeder jurisdictions, as they keep calling them, are going to double down on losing standpoints.
Losing propositions.
Yes, they're going to keep pouring gasoline on the Exodus fires because they can't help themselves. The mayor of New York was recently talking about their budget shortfall. He's blaming on the migrants. They're not helping, but the shortfall was already there.
Yeah.
It's just gonna they're gonna keep doubling down.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll add is I thought about this because I started seeing it a lot, where the young 20-year-old that just graduated college wants to be in Miami, but they haven't been with their parents for 5 years because they were studying somewhere else while their parents lived in Connecticut, for example. Now the parent in Connecticut has sold their home and wants to be in Miami, and now you've got this young professional rekindled with his father and mother that's like they're either living together or they're not, but like they're both in South Florida because they want to be. And now talk to me about where that person is going to raise a family. Probably in South Florida with his grandpa, with the grandpa and grandpas nearby.
That's awesome.
So the value proposition, it's just happening.
I agree. It's a good vibe. It's a good vibe. All we need now is Elon moving here.
That would
I keep saying that.
blow the roof off the doors.
That's what we need. That's what we need. We're getting everybody.
Anna, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Great.
Long Miami, everybody.
Very long Miami.